move to electronic communications and advocacy. In the state of California, Mr. Gwynn's organization supports 24 centers, which he expected will be forced to convert to electronic communications instead of providing a walk-in service. His network is requesting that court systems in multiple states extend orders of protection. Children who are unable to attend school or daycare are also at greater risk. Under normal circumstances, 90% of the children exposed to intimate partner violence in the home each year are witnesses to it. UNICEF reports to a higher rate of physical and sexual assault rates. Mr. Gwynn's organization runs Camp Hope America, a year-round camping and mentoring program for trauma-exposed youth in 25 states across the country. He said they are exploring other options for the camps to continue this year if there are still restrictions on gatherings, possibly moving them to children's local communities. They are also planning to incorporate phone and digital communication services. We might not see the statistics right away. When I spoke with Katie Ray Jones, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Domestic Violence Hotline last week, she told me there had actually been fewer calls in recent days, down from between 1,800 and 2,000 a day to approximately 1,700. This is not because domestic violence is happening less, but because it is harder for victims to report it. And we're just going to stop there. And this is the scary situation because it's already going down 100 calls. And what's 100 calls? Not truly 100 calls. It's 100 people that are needing to escape from the abusive environment. And the saddest thing for me is to think about all the women and men that are and children that are in abusive relationships, and say this week or last week, they were going to finally leave. They were going to finally take that step. And for all these things shutting down, for people to say, oh, I'm sorry, because of the coronavirus, we're not admitting anyone else, or just saying that, you know, we're actually shutting down. It's really, really sad because they can't get the help they need, or even the people that were going to finally call the hotline. You can't call anyone with an abuser in the house. That's the scariest thing in the world to do. There is no way, because you're like, okay, what is the probability of them not listening to the phone call by either getting the other phone in the house or even a cell phone, checking the number or listening through the door, and most likely you being out of the room too long. They're going to question that and come to you. So it's just so many things that can happen that a victim just will not call just to survive until and try to minimize the abuse as much as they can during the quarantine, which is the scariest thing in the world. So we have to pray for them during this time. And we're going to go back to the article here from the New York Times. It says, Ms. Ray Jones has seen how an abusive partner can leverage COVID-19 for fear, isolation, and manipulation. One caller to the hotline spoke about her husband forcing her to wash her hands repeatedly until they were raw and bleeding. Another threatened to kick her out of the house to increase her exposure to the virus. During this global public health crisis, we have more of a responsibility to reach out to those who are especially susceptible, older people, and those with pre-existing respiratory conditions. We can also be more alert to our friends and loved ones who are in abusive relationships and feel especially vulnerable in the time where social distancing is the new normal. So I'm not just getting into this. This is definitely a narcissist and abuser's playground. This quarantine is like, look, I don't have to do any work because the government's doing it for me. Isolation. So that charming person that he or she is around your family, and you're not allowed to go anywhere, or you can talk on the phone, but he'll just make, or she'll just make excuses to your family, like, oh, we're just going through a lot through the quarantine and this, that, and the other. We weren't able to do this, we aren't able to do that, to act like they're the most beautiful person, but the whole time they were abusing you. And it's just an abuser's playground right now, because they don't have to do the isolation tactics because it's already being done, and they can definitely torture you throughout this whole process. Now, this is the encouraging thing. And I'm going to read this right after I read this other part of the article here. And it says, for victims, Ms. Ray advises that when an argument breaks out, it's important to identify the safest place in the house, away from objects that may be weaponized, like the kitchen and bathroom. Prepare for a situation where an abuser might hide essential supplies like soap. While resources during the outbreak are limited, the experts I spoke to encourage victims to seek out shelters, hotlines, therapists, and counselors. Where walk-in services no longer available, phone and digital communication are still working. Ruth Glenn, the chief executive officer and president of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, advises victims turn to a trusted friend or family member, if available, who can make a call to a hotline on their behalf. Should they not be able to do so themselves in an emergency, Ms. Friedman recommends calling 911. As a victim of intimate partner violence told me when I was dealing with my own situation, you're not alone and you're not crazy. These resources can be a lifeline if you're in quarantine with an abusive partner. And again, this is from the New York Times article. I wanted to share it with you guys to give you some hope during this time. And again, if you want to read it by yourself, it's Where Can Domestic Violence Victims Turn During COVID-19 by Tanya Silver-Tarnum. And I really wanted to speak about it because I saw so many memes about it, or little quotes about praying for those that are in abusive relationships during isolation, because that is the worst time to be with an abuser, and for it to be mandated, oh my gosh, it's just no way, and it's sad to see that people would use this time to torture people, but they will. And so, just like the article said, still please reach out if you hear any arguing, any yelling, anybody pushing someone, shoving, things falling. Remember, we are mandated reporters. Everyone on the world should be a mandated reporter for abuse. Because at the end of the day, what happened if it was you? A lot of the times, abuse victims cannot reach out for help because the abuser's right there. And the sad thing is, even with that, when they're saying have your family member or friend call the hotline for you, sometimes even that is hard to get away from an abuser, for them not to have your phone or not to look at your phone as soon as you make a text. But if you are able to make that text, please make sure that you do it in a place where the abuser's not at the time, and then put on the end of it, do not text me back with any information. Do not text me back. Because if you send it out and then they say, oh yes, I called the hotline and they said this, and this, it has to be some type of code that you all come up with that's not too suspicious, that will assist you on getting out of that situation. But deletion is the best policy, making sure people don't give you any updates, because again, those abusers, they'll just take your phone out of nowhere, and then before you know it, an explosion occurs. So make sure you're doing that safely. Another thing is when it comes to trusted family members and friends, make sure that you know the relationship. And what I mean by that is this relationship a mutual relationship that the abuser and you have? Or is this more so this person's in your corner and the person just like respects that's your husband or wife? Because the problem is when it comes down to some family or friends, they may say, oh, I may come to the abuser, text them or call them and be like, give them a heads up. You know, they wanted me to do a hotline report for you because they say you're abusing them. And then what happens? Then it ends up being a situation where it's like they're just telling on you, telling the situation, telling your plans. And then there you go. Violence will occur, and then your phone is taken away, and that was your only source of communication. So really gauge those relationships. Really think about those relationships, because I don't want you not to speak out, but I want you to speak out to the correct people, because there could be relationships in which you think you have a good relationship with them, but they also have a really good relationship with the abuser, and they will give them a heads up. And that's not the greatest thing. So, for example, if you have a longtime friend and that's your friend for 10, 15, 20 years, and they just kind of tolerate your abusive husband or wife, that would be the person to tell. But then again, you have to make sure they're not one of those people that go off on the abuser and tell them, oh, you're not going to do this to my friend, and then make it a more toxic and volatile situation for you at home. So again, with the personality of the person, the relationships, always make sure you're, making an assessment before reaching out to that person, making sure that they're not the people that just say, oh, I'm going to go off on them for you. And that puts you in a horrible space, because you definitely know it will. You will get the backlash of that. Just making sure it's a person that's in your corner, that's not a person that reacts on emotions and exposes the whole situation, and then you're